Don't worry about the language. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. What's going on, everybody? How you guys doing? Welcome back to another episode of Muzzy Buzz. Yes, we're back, and I'm here to talk about a couple of things. So it's funny because the team had a chance to do a roundtable on the Mad Mamluks, on the Taliban. And I didn't have a chance to make that episode. Unfortunately, I got tied down with other things. But I thought I would provide some context. So, and people are probably thinking, what was your thoughts on it? What happened? And what do you think is going to happen in the future? And what's your overall view of the entire situation? So, I think it's important to, first of all, think about something. Afghanistan has been involved in a war pretty much for all of modern history. I mean, for what we can look at. As far as I remember being, a kid in the 1980s, I remember, under Ronald Reagan, we had the Afghan Soviet war that was happening. And that was a very interesting period, by the way. And I'll get into a story about this because this is really interesting. It's funny how politics can change. So in the 80s, the Afghan Mujahideen, which then later became the Taliban, they were hailed as heroes. And I remember seeing like Afghan Mujahideen in the White House, like with Ronald Reagan. There were pictures circulating and they were allowed to come into the country and seek medical treatment. And even more shockingly, they were allowed to recruit and petition or campaign for funds to support the effort against the Soviet Union. And this was really crazy if you think about this. And obviously, this is, pre 9/11. But I remember going to our local masjid, and there would be Afghan mujahideens that were sitting there and had been on a tour, touring around the USA, and they were visiting different masajids while they were healing. So basically, some of them were injured, some of them were just on funding missions, but nonetheless, the group that came to my masjid, which was at this time in Villa Park, called Islamic Foundation, you had mujahideen that were injured, and they were straight up telling people that there was a war going on, there was jihad, and they were inviting people to come fight with them. And think about that for a moment. As a child, we saw people that we saw as heroes, coming in, and they were paraded as such, meaning the U.S. government loved them. They had free rights to to get access to medical care, to talk about the jihad that was happening, to recruit, and to also get funding, to solicit funding. And I just remember being in awe. And I remember specifically there was one story. There was a guy that was sitting there, and I had seen the other mujahideen that were walking around, and some of them had like fingers missing or a limb missing, or I remember one specifically had a wound on his cheek. He had like it was healing, and you could tell the skin was new there, but he had a bullet wound through his cheek. And I remember that very, very, very graphically. Like it's still fresh in my memory. And I remember there was another Afghan mujahideen sitting in the corner. And me being a kid, I didn't see anything visibly wrong with him. So I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" And he just smiles. And the Afghans, they wear this huge shawl. And so he just uncovered, he just looked at me, smiled, and he uncovered his shawl. And half of his body was missing, like his left side, his arm, and his leg. And I remember just being taken aback, like just looking at that and saying, wow, and he was calm and just smiled at me, and he, covered himself back up with his other hand. And it was just really, it was one of those surreal moments when you realize, wow, this man has been at war. And even as a kid, I could imagine and I could conceptualize that, man, this man has seen bloodshed. He's seen the horrors in the theater of battle. And that was something that was raw in my memory as a child. I would always oftentimes think about that man and say, I wonder what happened to him. I wish I could reconnect with him. And because that little moment of humanity, like, I mean, just a human to human contact, let alone he was a war a veteran and someone who faced the Soviets, but his gentleness, his calmness, his tranquility, it was something that really resonated with me. But that was just a little story, but to show you how the Afghan Mujahideen were perceived pre 9/11. Fast forward post 9/11, and the entire narrative changes. These are backward men. They abuse people. They are the enemy number one. They're harboring terrorists. And mind you, these are the people that Ronald Reagan praised in the White House, calling them some of the most honorable men he's ever met. And you would think, well, what would change in 20 years or so at that time? And you look at the situation, and to be honest, the Afghan Mujahideen, whether they became a Taliban or not, they didn't really change very much. What really changed a lot is the American perception and the American foreign policy and the American objective. And that's what really changed. So what we saw firsthand as a child, as me growing up and then being in adulthood and witnessing 9/11 and then witnessing the narrative change, I began to realize that the political narrative or the narrative about any nation, person, country, religion changes when American politics changes. So their foreign policy or their view of groups or individuals is specifically catered and designed to match their domestic and foreign policy. And we witnessed that firsthand. And I know I'm not the only one that witnessed that. People in my generation that grew up, we definitely saw that. And so that leads to the question, like, how do I view the Taliban? How do I view what happened now and the takeover? And I think one thing that we have to be conscious of and we have to say is that, like them or hate them, but to put up a resistance for 17 years against one of arguably the most powerful military in the world is an accomplishment in and of itself. And like I said, whether you like them or you don't like them, these are men that pretty much were under-equipped, did not have much training, did not have sophisticated weaponry, munitions. They didn't have an air force. They didn't really have tanks and, a huge arsenal of weapons, but they had perseverance. They had faith in their creator. They had faith in what they were doing, and they held to their principles. I don't want to get into the whole reason of why the war started. There's plenty of videos on that, and and to what led up to the war in Afghanistan. My focus is primarily going to be on what I feel is going to happen now and how I personally view the situation. So when the Taliban came back into power, and I think this is probably going to be one of the most iconic moments of 2020, and there was a specific scene that I witnessed on television. And I believe the envoy was meeting with the U.S. delegation in, I think it was the UAE. I could be wrong here. But this is where they were brokering or having peace talks, essentially. And America was negotiating and had come to the table because they desperately wanted to bring the war to an end. And I just remember watching TV and I see all the U.S. delegation. They're sitting there, and very lavish and eloquent banquet hall, and very luxurious. Obviously, being the UAE, very nicely decorated. The media is there, the press is there, and the Afghan Taliban is late. and they came in fashionably late. I think like an hour late, and they came in strutting around like they didn't. They had their traditional garb, and they came in as like men who owned the place. They were walking, and it just was one of those moments, like surreal moments, like, you can see the way they viewed themselves in relationship to the Americans. No matter how powerful America was, no matter how much how many weapons they had, how powerful the weapons were, that didn't seem to phase them. They just looked at them like another country, another human being, and they were uncompromising. And I think you could see that in their walk, the ooze of confidence and conviction in what they believe in. And I think that will definitely be one of those iconic moments in 2020 when we look back in history. That moment when the Taliban comes in to negotiate with the U.S. delegation. But fast forward, it comes to an agreement, and the U.S. decides to hand over the government back to the Taliban. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about what I feel about that. So let's be first and foremost, I don't agree with everything the Taliban does. Then again, I'm not privy to any knowledge. I don't know of anyone in the Taliban. I've never been to Afghanistan. I'm not an Afghani. I'm foreign to that culture. So I don't really understand everything, but I think from an Islamic perspective, there are certain things that I do disagree with. And I think it's a fair comment for most Muslims to make, from who are maybe outside of the of Afghanistan or the Afghan government. But on that note, I do think as Muslims we should be giving them the benefit of the doubt. Nobody is going to argue that the Taliban is perfect. And I don't think anybody is foolish enough to make that claim or expect that. And just look at your own countries respectively, where you come from around the world. Even if you are in America or somewhere in the West, your own home countries, you're very patriotic towards them. And yet you recognize your leaders have faults, but yet you still hope that they do good, and you wish that there's good for the country, and that you hope that there's a possibility of change. And I would just like to point out that I wish that you would extend that to the Taliban government now as well. That we do wish that they succeed. We do hope, at least me, I hope they succeed in a way that's beneficial for the Afghan people and for themselves, and in a more Islamic way that is on the method of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, and the example that Islam sets forward. That would be the optimal ending, right? That or result. That this is what happens. But we know that human beings make mistakes. There are international politics involved here. There are personal objectives and aims. We know the Taliban itself does not desire to be a open emirate, meaning for everybody. They don't want to declare a khilafah. They've rejected this many times. They have only really the Afghan people as their interest and their lands. They're not really concerned with the outside world. And also on that note, there's another thing to criticize just off the bat here. Their willingness to work with China. And I think that's very problematic on a moral level, and even on an Islamic level. It is a problem for me. But do I throw the baby out with the bathwater? I think that's the bigger question. And my short answer is no. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's salvageable, meaning that people will make mistakes and perhaps they will learn from them, inshallah. But rather than wishing for their complete obliteration and destruction, I would say that it's better to maybe perhaps offer them advice or make dua for them that they make the right decisions, that Allah guides them in making the correct decision that is most pleasing to Him. So that's just my take on it. I don't want to see them fail. I want to see them succeed, but in a way that's beneficial for them in this life and in the next life. Another thing I want to comment on is we see the media also changing its tune now. For many, many years, the media wanted to highlight the fact that America has been at war for so many years, many American casualties, civilian deaths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The story unfolds, as you know. So finally, now when we have a solution with the government being, or the U.S. government being, pulling out, withdrawing, now the new narrative is that the Afghan government is evil. The new Afghan, the Taliban government is evil, and that they are the worst thing that could happen to the Afghan people, especially now the women. And this is something very interesting. And I thought about this. I said, you know what? When did they become the spokespersons for women in Afghanistan? A lot of these people who are jumping the bandwagon, they subscribe to intersectional beliefs, like intersectional feminism and blah, 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 whatever you mention. Just pick a name and you can, use that. But what happened to the intersectionality when it came to Afghan culture and people and religion and women and men? What happened to all of that? It seems to have disappeared overnight. It seems to me that their own intersectional ideas are what should then be enforced by the new Taliban government. Just the irony in it. Additionally, why wasn't the same criticism given to the previous Afghan president, who had a number of years to pass legislation that would outlaw some of these things that they're accusing the Taliban government of doing? You begin to wonder, where was the criticism then? What exactly are they calling for additionally? Do they view freedom as being able to wear a bikini or a hijab, or being able to claim anything about your gender or sex or race? Or, is this what truly is the hallmark of progress and advancement as a nation? I don't think so. I think those conversations are first world problems. Those discussions and conversations are for people of privilege, people who have the luxury of discussing those things. Emerging countries and countries that have economic problems and who have been war torn, they don't have the luxury of having those conversations right now because they're in the midst of rebuilding a country. So I don't think they're being fair. Number one, first of all, we don't even agree with that ideology and where they're going with it. But nonetheless, even if they wanted to push that, is now the time to do that? When you literally just handed over the government to a new government and they're trying to settle in, and this is the number one thing that you can think about: not economics, not education, not food, not water, not healthcare, not these basic human fundamental issues, but you'd rather talk about other things, about, for example, the pride flag that was, symbolic at the U.S. Army base being replaced with the Afghan Taliban flag. That is the most important thing right now in your minds, or for the people that are making the argument. And I would say for me, it's just ridiculous. It's lunacy. I don't know why you would focus on that right now at this moment in time, if you're even, if we're being logical here. Set aside our differences in religion and moral code and so forth and so on. We're speaking purely based on logic here. It doesn't make logical sense. And so I see this problem unfolding, that now we're going to see this narrative that the Afghan Taliban government is this most horrible thing, draconian, and now we're going back thousands of years now. This is regressive and so forth and so on. But I just don't see it that way. They tried to paint a narrative that, for example, the Kabul airport was chaotic and people were flying off the planes and jumping off the planes and trying desperately to get out the country. But I found it funny that even reporters on the ground had to note that the city of Kabul was relatively calm and peaceful. I noticed also today in the news that there was a protest. And guess what? It wasn't against the Taliban. It was women. It was women that were protesting, and they were showing their support for the Taliban government. So this shows that it's not monolithic. It's not black and white. There are women and people who do want this government to be in power. And the reason why I argue that is because many military experts in the news, so as they claim, they were saying that it would take weeks or months for the Taliban government to consolidate Afghanistan. And rather, we see that happening in the period of a week. And the interesting thing about that is this. People who are familiar with the Afghan people and the conflict, they're not people who simply accept change or force voluntarily, meaning they're not going to lay down and just do that. They've been a people who have fought back and they're not afraid of fighting. They're not afraid of dying either. We can see, we call it the graveyard of empires for a reason. Britain will tell you that. The Soviet Union will tell you that. And the US government will tell you that. And other Afghans inside Afghanistan will tell you that as well too. So a nation of people that is willing to fight and has a history of doing this is going to just lay down and let the Taliban walk over them, even though they don't want them. Think about that for a moment. Let that marinate. To me, being, appealing to my logic, it doesn't make sense. The only way the Taliban government could have taken over so quickly was because the people voluntarily gave them control in many of these areas. I'm not denying that in certain areas there's going to be fighting, like we're seeing in the Panjshir province over there. Yes, and there's a long history here. There are factions that have been fighting going back to the Afghan-Soviet War. Some of these rivalries will continue. But for the most part, the Taliban controls majority of Afghanistan today. And I don't think that could happen overnight or a period of a week if the people didn't want it. So that's how I kind of approach this right now. I'm not saying I'm all in praise of them, or I'm not going to condemn them entirely either. I say let it play out. Let the Taliban have a chance to see what they can achieve without foreign intervention, without your hashtags, without your aides, envoys masked with agendas. Let them carry out their own changes. Let them do it at a pace that is good for their people. They're better, or they're capable of understanding their people more than outside people are. And even, the Afghans in the diaspora, with all due respect, they don't live there, right? People who live there are capable of dealing with that better than people who don't live there. It's just a simple fact. We can't argue with that. So I would say that we need to give it time. If it comes out that they are, God forbid they become like ISIS, we have no problem condemning that. But if they're simply ruling their country the way they want to, and it's not infringing on people, it's not something severely oppressive, or it's not, things like that, give them time. Let them work it out. There are things, that will have to be worked out. It's called growing pains. Every nation, every country has gone through this. They've been at war since the 1980s, for crying out loud. They haven't stopped. Almost 2 to 3 generations of perpetual war. It takes a long time to undo these things, and people's nature changes when you go through this. So I say, show a little bit of leniency. Give them time to develop. I see very promising things, for example, the usage of social media. We see more engagement, civic and civil engagement from local ministers and Taliban officials. We see them posting up signs that, hey, if somebody is abusing you, especially for shopkeepers and trying to extort you, call this hotline. They have a number set up so that people can report violations like this. Things like this, to me, are indications that the Taliban has learned lessons from its previous position in government. And over time, they're beginning to understand the nature of people better and what they must do. And that's only for now. I don't know if that's going to continue in the future, but these are promising signs that they're willing to engage people and hear other people. And I think those things should be recognized that, this is a good thing. And I hope they continue to do more of that. But as far as, a blanket condemnation or blanket support, I'm not going to do that. I don't think anybody should do that. If you are keeping an open mind, I think we should let this one play out, and then time will tell. And when we see actions that call for condemnation or call for support, we will do that. Again, the Taliban government is not a caliphate. It's not it's not something that has to be perfect right away. Changes take time, and it's no different than anything else. So that's my 2 cents on the whole issue. Maybe you guys can comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about, the new Afghan government and the Taliban in general. Let me know what your thoughts are. Maybe if I got this whole thing completely wrong, maybe I missed something. And maybe you can provide a different perspective for me. Again, I am admittedly very ignorant of the Afghan culture. I do know a little bit about the Taliban and how they came into power and the Afghan-Soviet War and that history of that. But I'm by no means an expert in foreign policy, especially in relating to Afghanistan. However, these are just my loosely formed opinions on the issue. Some people asked me, they were wondering why I wasn't on the episode. It wasn't because I was disinterested. It was because I didn't have a chance to get on there. But nonetheless, these are my views. Let me know. But before you go, make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and make sure to smash that like button, annihilate that like button, because it'll help people see this video in the algorithms or through the algorithms. With that being said, I appreciate all of you guys and all of your support. Anyone that's a Patreon member, I'm going to be making another video thanking these people personally. By the way, I've never got a chance to do that, and I want to take the time to do that. You guys have been amazing to me. I know I'm not the most consistent person, but I plan to do that more now. And I really do appreciate you guys from the bottom of my heart, And even to those of you that haven't become Patreon members, those of you that watch the videos, that comment, that interact with me, that reach out, I love it. I do this to interact with all of you, and I love the feedback, and I think it helps me refine some of my thoughts and my arguments, and I do appreciate the feedback. So with that being said, we're going to close this one out. I appreciate you joining me all the way here to the end. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Until next time, let's talk about it.